Do I talk about protein bars? Do I talk about sushi? Do I talk about just job stuff? And that turned into vlogging, which turned into, I blinked and all of a sudden I was in the process of firing myself and kind of starting all over again at 47.
This is Creator, the podcast from Matador Network. I'm your host, Ross Borden, and I believe creators are the future of all global advertising. So join me as I sit down with top creators to hear about how they got started, the challenges they've overcome, and the tips you need to become a full-time creator. All right, welcome back to another episode of Creator, the podcast. Today we have Timm Chiusano, from one of my favorite creators and someone I discovered very early on TikTok, making like really innovative content very consistently. Timm, welcome to the pod.
How you doing, Ross? Thanks for having me on, brother.
So tell us where you are at the moment. And for those who don't follow you on social, tell us a little bit about yourself.
The first part's an easy answer. I'm in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn, and I'm sitting in my home office, which I'm now doing for the first time in 14 years. The journey. Corporate dude, really had a relatively normal-ish career, I'll say. I wanted to be in production. I wanted to be in sports. I wanted to be in marketing. Bobbed around a little bit over 20 plus years in the corporate space. Last 11 years, I was at basically what everyone would know as the cable company, Charter Communications, which, depending on what city you live in, would be known as Spectrum to you. And I oversaw a team of 240 individuals spread out across the country. My team was the reason why you would see small businesses on TV. The car commercial, the new restaurant in town, all of a sudden it goes from an Apple spot to come on down to Bob's Toyota. My team was the reason why Bob's Toyota had a commercial. It's just been part of the cable advertising game forever. And they brought me in 2013 to try to help reinvent the space. And then in 2020, started making TikToks because I thought this is an interesting tool for a couple different reasons. One, I thought that from a workflow perspective, especially considering I was running a large team that was producing 20,000 pieces of creative annually, something that is going to be able to capture, edit, and post all in one workflow, even if it's not broadcast quality, like what can I learn from that? And so let me play around with it. And then also from a self-expression perspective, at least to a certain extent, being 47 years old, I was one of the first probably million people to download Instagram, if not in a smaller pile than that, but never had creator aspirations, so to speak, outside of, write some stuff here and there and it never goes anywhere. Or I'll, make a video that's unnecessarily overproduced as a, recap of a family trip kind of thing. But TikTok gave a new opportunity for there to literally be not a single human being that knew who I was or what I was up to. I just started playing around in it. And relatively early on, I started to get a sense that there might be an interest in somebody bringing perspective from, the other side of the corporate ladder, so to speak, right? Like someone that's, that's in it, that's doing it. And once I realized that I didn't really have to quote unquote niche myself and that I almost had too many niches, I was like, do I talk about protein bars? Do I talk about sushi? Do I talk about just job stuff? Then I was like, I don't have time to really even think about it. I'm just going to talk about all of it and kind of figure it out as I go. And that turned into vlogging, which turned into I just capture stuff during the day, and then the next morning, hopefully I can make some sort of cohesive story out of it. And then I blinked and all of a sudden I was in the process of firing myself and kind of starting all over again at 47.
Yeah, I want to get into that new life after firing yourself. But I think that was a vibe that I got. And I don't know how early on I was following your account on TikTok, but I think pretty early. But I immediately got the vibe that like, this is a guy with a big, important job who works in media and production and storytelling for his company or for different brands. I thought maybe you worked at one of the big agencies. And I was like, he's probably experimenting with this because it's a new storytelling platform and it's a new way of creating frictionless, fast content. But then like your stories were so good. I think you were the first one that was like you would do the loop, you know, I don't know what you call that as a creator, but like, you know, you could watch it on a loop and it all makes sense given your voiceover. Um, and that so you're ending the video with and that's why I always say and then it like
Mhm.
goes into the beginning of your video perfectly. But yeah, a couple things struck me with your content. One is that you were clearly a very busy guy in your corporate life. You had a family. You were always like running, and it was sort of like a day in the life of Timm. But I loved your videos because they always had a takeaway. There was always like I was blown away at like how much you were getting done in these like it's a normal Wednesday, but it was like you clearly are a very busy, productive person. So how did like first I want to go back to when you still were working at the job, you're still managing what, 200 people on your team?
To 240.
240. So you're managing a massive team of people. What was the reaction of your company and of your team when you were like, "Oh, now Timm has like hundreds of thousands of followers and he's making these videos seen by millions of people." What was the reaction when people started to sort of like discover you at work?
It was a slow drip. It was a very weird slow drip, but thank God it was a bit of a slow drip with a couple of, what I'll say like were kaboom moments where all of a sudden it was just water cooler talk across the entire company. The company is 100,000 people coast to coast,
Wow.
including Hawaii. So as things would start to get bigger, luckily I got into the space sooner than what Charter knew what to do with me. And fortunately for everybody, the natural angle that I took was that enjoy your work, be kind in the office, be thoughtful, be considerate, be reliable, like all of these almost cliche things that you would want to instill in any workforce.
Hmm.
And that was just naturally coming across because that's just the way that I existed and lived. I had just gotten through like a very toxic time in my career as well and was on the other side of it. So I almost had like this rebirth of a mindset too of like, wow, I helped, I had helped us kind of turn a page, so to speak, from a culture perspective.
What do you mean toxic? Why what was toxic about the former part of your career?
In 2014 or 15, Comcast comes in and they try to acquire us. The two biggest cable companies, I think, on the planet, on these merger discussions, and they're putting up name tags on doors already. And it starts to become more like, hey, how do I make sure that my job gets saved or where's my space? And then egos start to come out. And it was just this environment that I was extraordinarily uncomfortable in addition to just the overall change management that I'd already been through. Because the Thursday before my first day, before any of this in this job, they brought me in. They said, you're going to inherit 100 people for this new role of vice president of production and creative services. You have to fire everybody in the first 6 weeks. You have 8 months to rebuild the department from scratch. Here's the new business model. You handle 20,000 projects annually. That can't slip while you're doing this. I was 35 years old. I just had a kid. I'm
Wow.
like, what the fuck is going on? I
Wait,
left
you had to fire
ESPN,
100 people? You inherited
100
100
people,
people and you had to fire all of them?
all of them within the first six
Holy
weeks. One of
shit,
those,
brutal.
yeah, your jobs as you know it no longer exist. And I went through all of the mental conundrums that one would go through in a situation along those lines. And I ultimately arrived at, if I walk away from this, like there does not seem to be a discussion. It was, here's the job. Now let us tell you like how it's actually going to go down. And I remember because that's why they brought me in the Thursday before my first day. I thought, wow, look at how cool and important this job is. I have to go in early for additional prep work. Like, isn't this
Damn.
amazing? I'm a VP at 35. And they sit me down and they have this conversation. I'm like, oh my God, what in the world have I signed myself up for? And so by the time TikTok comes out and I start making them, like I'm kind of in this, I'm like just turning the page, mentally from everything that I just described. And because nobody knew me there either, I was like, I can do whatever I want here. Like I'm going to learn from a technology and from a workflow perspective. And then I can just be 17 if I want to. I can talk about like whatever, things. And then as I started to understand what might be useful to the audience, and also because of everything that I just said, I'm like, I know I could help anybody think their way through a work conundrum.
So I want to come back to that stuff later in terms of the corporate culture and happiness and appreciation. But first on the creative angle, I think like if I was running a huge brand and I saw that someone from my team was like making TikToks every day, I'd be thrilled because like those of us who've worked a lot in production know that there can be insane amounts of like waste of money and time and overthinking things and overshooting things and spending too much on video that's, overproduced. And then
Yep.
you have to pay for every view. Whereas like what really works are basically TikTok style, more, quick to edit, quick to produce, quick to ideate. So how did that change? Like, were you kind of just doing that for fun on the side when you were doing your own stories? Or were you also, did some of the work you were doing for yourself on TikTok bleed over into some of the work that you guys were making for all these small business clients as you guys were running this big team?
It's a great question. There was almost no spillover for a couple different reasons. Number one, I was breaking every rule in the company handbook on a daily basis. Cannot capture content on premise, cannot use company equipment for blah, blah, blah. But it got too big to fail before they knew what to do with me. Where I was like, hey, there's an employee that has however many thousand I had when they finally figured it out. Right.
Right.
Also because of the demographic that it skewed towards, it took a while until you either had to follow me or you had to connect the dots. But in a company that big, it was kind of easy to just have this happening underneath the current until it was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Like, who is this? Like, uh, and that was kind of a wild experience in and of itself. And I tried to be very cautious about it too. And, also too, in that position, I try to stay out of the day to day. Like my job was for 240 people, my job was, is our budget being managed, is eloquently as humanly possible? Is
Right.
What's our 5-year capex plan? Like,
Right.
how are
You're
we
not in the
structured?
war room with creative, like this is what we should do for that video. You're managing 240 people and
Totally,
making sure budgets are on track. But
totally.
your employer, when they found out that you were a million follower creator on TikTok, it was too late for them to essentially ask you to stop. But you're saying like those creative learnings from TikTok that you were, as you figured out the platform and making better and better content, didn't really bleed into the client work that you were doing essentially.
Well, two quick things on that. One, there was a really funny, especially in hindsight now, moment where when a Rolling Stone article came out that I got in trouble for it because it mentioned in the article that I worked for Spectrum. And as long as I kept the word Spectrum out of my mouth or out of an article or a podcast or whatever, I was basically just going and doing whatever I wanted to do. When technically, anything that we did as individual employees that was in the public facing domain that had any general association with the fact that we worked for this company had to be vetted by PR, right? Again, 100,000 person company. They don't want people out there just being like, hey, I'm going to talk to whomever about whatever. So if you were public speaking, quote unquote, you needed full on approval before you even did it. And there was a chance that someone from PR was actually going to be on the phone or in the room with you. And so
Right.
when the Rolling Stone thing popped up, I was like, I know where this would go. They'd be like, oh, we want to vet the questions. We want to help you prep your answers. And can we come over to your house when this happens? And it was like, absolutely not. And no, thank
And
you.
especially when the
So
title of the Rolling Stone piece was Meet the Overachieving Creator Teaching TikTok to Chill the Fuck Out. That
yeah, that was
they may have
amazing.
turned some heads at the company.
Yeah, so when that dropped, and it was funny, I was like, the interview happened, and then time goes by and you don't hear. And I'm not like going to follow up with the writer who is just a wonderful human being across the board and wildly talented too. I mean, God, am I so fortunate that she even thought of this in the first place. And all of a sudden, one day, it was like 3 or 4 months later, hey, the article, hey, hope all's well. Article's almost ready. I'll send you a copy. I was like, amazing. 2 seconds later, here it is. And I was in a meeting and I remember being like, oh shit, this is really happening. Like that was this is cool to, oh, maybe it went away and maybe I'm not cool anymore. Maybe they just don't want to do this anymore to,
Mhm.
oh my God,
It's going live tomorrow.
no, it was like already live by the time that she sent it to me. It was like, hey, here's a 30-second warning kind of thing. Once that came out and started to get around the company, it was like wildfire. And then all of a sudden the next day, my boss is knocking on my door, being like, "Hey Tim," it's like,
You
"Hey
want to talk about
Michael."
the Rolling Stone piece?
Yeah, he's like, "How?" No, he was great. One of the best human beings I've ever worked with. He goes, "How was your day yesterday?" And I remember I'm like, "I know where you're going with this, but I appreciate the fact that you're like really trying." He's like, and he said, "Personally, holy shit, man, good for you. Professionally, we might have a bit of an issue on our hands. Like it said spectrum in there, like this went up to the top of the food chain. And because there's like multiple verticals within the company, it was like it went all the way up to the CEO, and the CEO called the president of our side of the company. And the president of our side of the company was like, "What are you talking about?" They were there. They're like, "Hey, you have an employee that was in Rolling Stone yesterday. Like, what the fuck is going on?" And he's like,
And
"I
his
don't know
PR
what's
team
going
had
on."
no idea, no heads up. He's just like, wait, what?
Right, which is like which is the
This is the
worst, right? You feel like
worst.
you're caught
Yeah.
blindsided. So
Right.
he
So
was
he's
he
not
was he was
happy.
pissed. Yeah, and so like I remember being reprimanded for that. But outside of that, it was they really, like, especially in hindsight, they did a pretty amazing job of just letting me do my thing.
So when did the soul searching start? When were we talking to your wife and your boss about like, do I really still want to do this? And should I, you know, try and elegantly fire myself and restructure my team?
Probably summer of 23, I
Okay.
would say, is when it started to get real. Like that, I think it was that spring that the Rolling Stone article dropped, and like all of a sudden I'm getting phone calls from agencies or agents, and started to get. I think I had already signed with an agency called Park and Fine to work with them as my literary agency.
It's funny, I started this podcast. I'm talking to all these digital creators, and then like half of the most successful ones are talking about their book being the thing that like really cracked their career wide open, or they keep writing books because the books are like this flywheel that's spinning and it's getting them more press, more followers, more brand deals. The books are doing well. They're getting another book deal. So why not just keep your job, keep the paycheck, keep making TikToks and write the book on the side? What was missing, or what else are you going to put behind this new career as a creator and a writer that you wouldn't be able to do if you had stayed at your job?
One of the tipping point moments was getting a project handed to me by the president. There was something that was somewhat of an annual thing that would pop up. And so I remember getting that, and I had gotten to the point where, for things along those lines, I was able to quickly evaluate, almost in a blink, how much time it was going to take me, right? Got really good at time blocking over the past decade. And so I saw it. I'm like, that's at least 20 hours just over the next 2 weeks alone of just kind of like meetings and keystrokes. And I remember thinking, what else would I do with that 20 hours? I don't know that and I didn't have like the firm answer in my head, but that just wouldn't get out of my head of like, what would I do with this extra time? Especially because I had my wife supporting me saying, don't wait too long. Like it wasn't even
To
a
make the
question in her
leap, if you're going
mind.
to make the leap, don't wait too long. We haven't really touched on brand deals. So let's touch on that quickly before we wrap. So, you, like I said earlier, you've been on both sides of the table. You're a creator, but you've definitely been on the brand side as well. And it sounds like the role when you were managing 240 people, you guys are also essentially doing like agency work too. So creative production, creative strategy. So you've kind of seen it all. What brand deals have you had that you think are some of the best ones personally for you? And then what advice would you give to both creators and to the brands in terms of like making great content that people actually want to watch?
Amazing questions. I'm really proud of the Dyson work that I've done. I've been a Dyson home partner for, I think, a year and a half now, and really smart on their part where they're like, you're using our product. You obviously like vacuuming because it's just a part of your daily routine. Like, let's figure out how to bring that to life. And they bought an idea that I pitched, which was their robot vacuum was basically applying to be a new housemate of ours. And so I'm like touring it around the home and, adding a little bit of whimsical magic, so to speak, to something that could have just been like, here's the product, here's what it does, here's why I use it, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So like storytelling from a different perspective. So I love to work with Dyson. I'm in the process of getting some pieces through a queue with Lincoln right now, and I'm actually really excited about the last one that I just shot, where the whole thing is about pushing your boundaries. And how do I do that to a reasonable degree that's not just going to be something that checks the boxes for what the brief says, but doesn't actually deliver to the audience, right? Because I think that that's to the second part of your question. It has to deliver value at the end of the day. And by delivering value, it's got to be something where someone's going to want to share it with somebody else, or they want to keep it to come back to it later. And that's really hard to do with an ad piece. But I think the way that you can get there is to have that be part of the conversation, be cognizant of the brief, but not have it just be the brief because that's what gets the internal approvals. All right. There was a piece that I did with, I won't call out the brand name. There's a piece that I did with the drink company, and they had a very specific angle of like, here, we want you to tell people why you use this beverage, for these reasons. And I remember being like, it's pretty close. Like, it's not really off the mark for me as an individual. So like, yeah, I can do it. But in hindsight, because they said, this is what we want you to do for these reasons versus here's what we're looking to get across.
Yeah. How does this apply to your actual life and your story authentically?
But even beyond that, how does this apply to the user's life? Who gives a shit about my life, right? Like, there's a lot of things that I could talk about that's like, cool, this thing is amazing, but unless I give the viewer a nugget that is actionable, insightful, or elicits some sort of emotion from them, then it's useless. I did a brand piece with a sneaker company, and they were very cool about me saying, this is not going to be about the sneakers. This is going to be about my running path. Because if I tell people, if I use this opportunity to say, this is one of the best running paths that most New Yorkers don't know about, and I'm literally just going to bring them along the road and show them exactly where to go, what the best time of day is, and those types of things. And I just happen to be wearing their sneakers while doing it. That did super well. Why? Because people wanted to remember what that was. They wanted to share it with a friend. Hey, let's go run this running path. And it just happened to be that it was part of a brand deal, where if it was like, let me tell you what's so great about this sneaker.
Pure scrolling.
Yeah, exactly. Even if it had like the most incredible shit in it ever.
You're kind of a brand dream if they're smart enough to listen to you, because you come with you're like, I see where you're going with this brief. I've been here before, but I'm going to spin it a little bit. And I think that's an important lesson for both the brands. And I know we have a lot of brands that listen to this podcast around how can they work more effectively with creators. So being a little more open to going beyond what's just in the brief and like read the cue cards and hit the points and then we're done. And then I think for the creators, a lot of creators, when they get approached by a brand, they're like, I don't want to screw this up, so I'm just going to do what they say. When I think the better thing to do, which is actually good for the brand as well, is being like, I see where you're going with this, but to make this more authentic to my audience and more impactful and more authentic to me, which is what you've been telling me you want. Authenticity is like a cliche almost, is how much it gets mentioned in this industry. They should kind of take it a little step further, or tweak the theme, or tweak the content a little bit, because that's going to make for better content.
Yep. If I was a brand, right, if you put me immediately back in that world, I am bringing in creators in the development of the broader campaign that they're, effectively at the end of the day, going to be one of the last dominoes to fall on.
Right.
Here's what we're developing for Doritos next year. Here's what, is in the origin stages for this new, whatever it is.
Bringing the creator way up the creative food chain to get a look at the ideas in their infancy before they're like fully formed.
Totally. Treating it almost like, hey, we want to treat this as like user testing to a certain extent. It's going to be that much easier to turn things around and hopefully then create, long-term relationships too, because, there's a reason why LeBron James and some of the biggest celebrities in the world, they don't bounce around between brands all the time. Yes, it's because they're the world's biggest celebrities, but also because people like consistency when it comes to the people that they associate with which brands, and if we just become basically NASCAR drivers with a bazillion logos stuck all over ourselves and nobody knows what the hell we stand for, if we're for this sneaker or for that sneaker.
Yeah, it's all worthless. You kind of stand for nothing.
Yes. And then but it's the brands that are doing that to the space. It's not the space doing that the other way around, and brands need to be cognizant of that.
Yeah. Very good advice. Love it. Well, Tim, we're over time. I have a feeling you're about to become a best-selling author. So tell us when we can look for the book, How to Get Addicted to Appreciation. Is that right?
How to Get Addicted to Appreciation. Fingers crossed, early September. And if I can deliver something that really gets people to look at their day-to-day differently, then I think it's going to be really fun. And I think it's going to be really fun to see how I can impact people's worlds.
Well, congrats on the new life as a full-time creator. Congrats on the huge following and the amazing content on TikTok, and congrats on the book deal. And we'll be looking for it.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for having me on today.
Thanks for joining. Creator, the podcast, is produced by Matador Network. We are a leading global travel publisher focused on travel and adventure. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe. Every week, I interview a new top creator. New episodes are released every Tuesday on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere podcasts are found. Thanks for listening.